Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama has announced the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan will continue until the end of 2016. On Tuesday, Obama said the U.S. will maintain almost 10,000 troops in Afghanistan after its formal combat mission concludes at the end of this year. The U.S. will eventually withdraw troops until only a small residual force remains after 2016.
At the beginning of 2015, we will have approximately 9,800 U.S. service members in different parts of the country, together with our NATO allies and other partners. By the end of 2015, we will have reduced that presence by roughly half, and we'll have consolidated our troops in Kabul and on Bagram Airfield. 1 year later, by the end of 2016, our military will draw down to a normal embassy presence in Kabul with a security assistance component, just as we've done in Iraq.
By the time the U.S. fully withdraws, the war will have lasted over 15 years, the longest in U.S. history. We'll have more on Afghanistan after headlines. Thousands of people have gathered at the University of California, Santa Barbara in a day of mourning for the victims of Friday's shooting and stabbing rampage. Elliot Rodger killed 6 people, then himself, after posting a video online saying he was seeking revenge against all women for rejecting his sexual advances. UC Santa Barbara students joined together to remember their classmates.
I know it hit close to home for some students here, and I felt like we needed a space to recognize that.
When one part of the body hurts, like, we all hurt, and like, if UC Santa Barbara is going through this tragedy, like, we're going through it too.
The shooter had 3 semi-automatic handguns, all purchased legally. The father of one of the slain victims is now vowing to continue speaking out in favor of gun control. Richard Martinez, whose 20-year-old son Christopher was killed, made headlines immediately following the attack after calling out the NRA and politicians who stand in the way of gun reform. On Tuesday, Martinez said he rejects condolences from lawmakers, saying, quote, "I don't care about your sympathy. Get to work and do something." Martinez says he's calling on all Americans to send a postcard to Congress demanding the passage of gun control. Speaking at Tuesday's memorial, Martinez paid tribute to his son as well as another son, saying their deaths won't be in vain.
My dearest son, Wei Han David, Mom and Dad are very proud of you. Your sacrifices weren't in vain. Your sacrifice will wake the power and authority of America. It's time to stop the gun violence. Our children deserve a land free from fear. Son, you will be at peace in the hands of God.
According to the Gun Violence Archive, firearms have killed over 4,100 people in the United States since January 1st of this year. President Obama is delaying a review of his administration's controversial deportation practices until after the summer. Obama had ordered Homeland Security Secretary Jed Johnson to look into legal ways to scale back deportations amidst rising pressure from civil rights groups who've dubbed him the deporter-in-chief. Proposals have included limiting the deportations of undocumented immigrants who do not have criminal records, who account for some 2/3 of the 2 million people Obama has deported. But the White House now says Obama wants to put off any potential reforms to avoid angering House Republicans and dooming chances of passing a comprehensive immigration reform bill this year. House Republicans have refused to take up immigration reform despite the Senate's passage of a bipartisan measure offering a path to citizenship 1 year ago next month. A top White House advisor says Obama plans to give Republicans one more chance to negotiate a compromise measure. Ukraine says it's taken control of the airport in the eastern city of Donetsk following fierce clashes with separatist rebels. The Ukrainian government says 48 people were killed, nearly all rebel fighters. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, meanwhile, has announced it's lost contact with 4 monitors who are in Donetsk during the airport standoff. The violence followed Ukraine's election of billionaire chocolate tycoon Petro Poroshenko in the country's first presidential vote since the ouster of Viktor Yanukovych. More than 30 people have been killed in the Boko Haram's latest attack in Nigeria. Militants struck a military base in the state of Yobe, killing dozens of government forces. The attack comes amidst rumors of talks between the government and Boko Haram representatives over freeing the close to 300 kidnapped schoolgirls. Nigeria's former president, Olusegun Obasanjo, has reportedly met with figures close to the Boko Haram. The Nigerian government has ruled out formal talks, but has not denied that some form of discussions are underway. The head of Nigeria's military has said the military now knows where the abducted girls are being held, but has ruled out using force to rescue them for fear of endangering their lives. We'll have more on Nigeria later in the broadcast. A computer hacker who led a series of cyber attacks on governments and corporations before turning FBI informant has been released from prison. Hector Xavier Monsegur, known by his alias Sabu, walked free Tuesday after being sentenced to time served. The 7 months he spent behind bars. Sabu was once a key member of Anonymous and Lulzsec, launching cyber attacks that caused an estimated $50 million worth of damage. But he later turned on his cyber comrades. Working for the FBI, Sabu allegedly directed his friends to carry out more cyber attacks while feeding investigators enough incriminating evidence to indict them. Defense attorney Peggy Cross Goldenberg said Sabu hopes to put his past behind him.
It has been a long and hard 3 years for Mr. Monsegur. We're very pleased that the judge recognized both what an extraordinary person he is and the extraordinary efforts that he has gone through in the past 3 years to turn his life around and to make up for his conduct and really to, as she said, use his skills to do good. Those who know him know that he is a smart, diligent, loyal, hardworking person, and Mr. Monsegur and his family are looking forward to putting this behind them and moving on with their lives to do good things.
Sabu also played a key role in the government's arrest of computer hacker Jeremy Hammond, who was sentenced last year to 10 years in prison for hacking into computers of the private intelligence firm Stratfor. Hammond has accused Sabu and the FBI of using him to attack the web pages of foreign governments. The Supreme Court has struck down a law that limited how death row prisoners can prove they're mentally disabled. Federal law bans the execution of the mentally impaired. The law says prisoners must have an IQ below 70 before being allowed to present any additional evidence to prove their case. In a 5-4 decision, the court ruled the law violates the Eighth Amendment ban on cruel and unusual punishment. Democratic Congressmember John Conyers of Michigan has won a place on his district's upcoming primary ballot after facing the threat of exclusion. The Wayne County elections clerk had initially ruled Conyers was not eligible for the primary because his campaign failed to collect enough valid signatures and one of his staffers were not properly registered to vote. But a federal judge has ruled the missteps by Conyers' staff were the result of good faith mistakes, wrongly believing they were in compliance. First elected in 1964, Congressmember Conyers is the House's second longest-serving incumbent. The NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden has spoken out in his first interview with an American television network. Speaking to NBC News anchor Brian Williams, Snowden rejected government attempts to dismiss his views by painting him as a low-level analyst.
What I do is I put systems to work for the United States. And I've done that at all levels, from the bottom on the ground all the way to the top. Now, the government might deny these things. They might frame it in certain ways and say, oh, well, you know, he's a low-level analyst. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to use one position that I've had in a career here or there to distract from the totality of my experience, which is that I've worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, undercover, overseas. I've worked for the National Security Agency, undercover, overseas, and I've worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency as a lecturer at the Joint Counterintelligence Training Academy, where I developed sources and methods for keeping our information and people secure in the most hostile and dangerous environments around the world. So when they say I'm a low-level systems administrator, that I don't know what I'm talking about, I'd say it's somewhat misleading.
The full interview airs Wednesday night in an embassy special. And in a Democracy Now! Exclusive, the nation's former top counterterrorism official has said he believes President George W. Bush is guilty of war crimes for launching the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Richard Clarke served as National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism during President Bush's first year in office. He resigned in 2003 following the Iraq invasion and later made headlines by accusing Bush officials of ignoring pre-9/11 warnings about an imminent attack by al-Qaeda. On Tuesday, Richard Clarke spoke to Democracy Now! In an interview that will air next week. Do you think President Bush should be brought up on war crimes and Vice President Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld for the attack on Iraq?
I think things that they authorized probably fall within the area of war crimes. Whether that would be productive or not, I think is a discussion we could all have. But we have established procedures now with the International Criminal Court in The Hague where people who take actions as serving presidents or prime ministers of countries have been indicted and have been tried. So the precedent is there to do that sort of thing. And I think we need to ask ourselves whether or not it would be useful to do that in the case of members of the Bush administration. It's clear that things that the Bush administration did, in my mind at least, it's clear that some of the things they did were war crimes.
Richard Clarke, the nation's former top counterterrorism official under President George W. Bush. Tune in to Democracy Now! Next week for our full interview. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.